The book in your hands calls itself a novel, and it is a novel, I maintain. So I want to assure the reader that everything that follows in this chapter is verifiably non-fiction. Inside Story by Martin Amis. 30 books into his commanding literary career, English novelist Martin Amis continues tenderly to dote on his readers. In his novels, we are his guests, and for that patronage, we are most grateful. At the opening of his bracing, masterful, and genre-defying novel, Inside Story, Amis welcomes us at the doorway, invites us to sit beside the fireplace, and pours us the scotch and soda. Oh, thank you.
I, in common with many writers, I think, feel that there is and this may be again just something that every writer feels in every generation, that there's a great convulsion of stupidity happening in the world, mostly to do with television.
The scene is a capacious brownstone on a leafy block in Brooklyn, the setting of his new life overseas, and a place which will, in due course, become the site of a horrendous New Year's Eve fire and its rather exasperatingly diluvial aftermath. It's also the bastion to which Amis returns to soak in the pure promise of future life, as certain of his great mentors, friends, and erstwhile romantic partners are laid to rest. From the opening pages, charming episodes of fussy hosting give way to lucid reminiscences and renderings of select moments from the author's true and, we must add, rather exalted biography, which capture not only Amis's life as it might have been experienced, but how memory itself is activated, a phantasmagorium continually conjured, felt, and patted down for meaning in the mind. Reading Inside Story, we remember that our term for imaginative literature, fiction, derives from the Latin fictio, meaning fashioning, shaping, or forming. It connotes the artifice and confabulations of a master builder whose entrenched habits of disciplined craftsmanship span half a century. Ostensibly, Amis has long embraced this definition for fiction, for, since the days of London Fields and Time's Arrow, he has driven the form and narrative styling of his novels into realms of ever greater dimensionality, exploring certain cognitive and structural techniques, producing newer and greater effects in his fiction, and allowing the novel to describe experience with freshness and renewed insight. Run your fingers across the brownstone's handsome molding. Unlodge a stray footnote with your toe. The house is full of old secrets. A false bottom, a hidden door. We could take this place, strong place, at face value, but knock on a wall and you'll locate a hollow. Deeper still into the caverns of the house is where the real living room is located. Our host has been fussing, productively and ingeniously, towards a diligently contrived ending, towards a summa apologia pro vita sua. One might say that in this case, our narrator is reliable, though our narrative is not. Or rather, the narrative is true in the way that an arrow may be said to be true when aimed at the bullseye. An unreliable memoirist exculpates his dirty work by returning to fictio, shaping, mapping a new genre against the overcast London nighttime sky. Amis's writing turns historical events and interpersonal memories into windows or transparent things through which the past shines, to quote one of his favorite authors, Vladimir Nabokov. Indeed, meaning flashes like refracted light across the cozy halls of Inside Story, as those many exterior windows suddenly steel themselves and behave as mirrors for the lightning-quick transmission of meaning through the mind's many corridors. Thus, Amis's continued inventiveness in form must be viewed as an expression of his taste, not a pure push for novelty in vacuo. There's a certain type of story that needs telling here, and Amis has set his task to inventing the format. Indeed, the special novelty of Inside Story is that it is entirely innovative without having to resort to inventiveness. And oh, what a cast of characters our host introduces us to. Extended interpositions figure in, by his father's great friend, the dour Philip Larkin, and Amis's own best pal, the unflappable Christopher Hitchens. A dash of the youthful Anna Wintour, 2 Fingers John Updike, half a dram of Robert Conquest, a pinch of Iris Murdoch, a sprinkling of Salman Rushdie and Tony Judt, a long pull of Vladimir and Vera Nabokov. Inside Story is the tale of mentorship, friendship, and sexual partnership. And the key mentor in the novel is Saul Bellow, the granddaddy of 20th century American letters. For Saul Bellow, who is progressively menaced by the onset of Alzheimer's as the novel deepens, as he was in life, quote, laughter was essentially communitarian, and perhaps this is why he liked all jokes, however puntsome and however dirty. Jokes are invitations to laughter, so he liked all jokes and liked belonging to a species that liked telling them, end quote. The book opens with Saul in Israel and begins to culminate with a Jewish burial, Saul's, in a cemetery in Vermont. What we enjoy is insight wedded with humor, a real-life snapshot interposed with a serious reading of the work, and the illusions, at least those that pricked the sinews and primed the pineal, were as follows: John Donne, repeatedly; Shakespeare, repeatedly and explicitly; Anthony Burgess, coyly but cogently; Wilfred Owen, downright poignantly. Adding to these, the fabric of the book is enlivened by Amos's mastery of conventional rhetorical techniques, repetition, foreshadowing, illustrative asides, and historical resonance, which powerfully enhance not only the telling of a life, but the craft or sullen art of novel-making in the 21st century. The particular subspecies of the novel in which the author may be said to be operating, namely autofiction, is especially suited to Amos, who has a Shakespearean quality about his life, albeit in a tragicomic mode. That is to say, Amos's personal life, much like that of Prospero or Leontes, is merged, not exclusively, with the highest echelons of social status, and comes through the ravages of personal loss with a more deeply fortified bulwark against the vagaries of time. He is world famous, so far as literary authors go, and was born of a father likewise widely heralded in his profession, the distinguished English comic novelist Kingsley Amis. Amos Feast is the author of a previous autobiography, Experience, ostensibly prompted by the death of Kingsley in 1995. Autofiction helps transform diverse tributaries of thought and experience into a coursing river of theme and aesthetic governance. Pet theories, ruminations on Shakespeare, stray, piercing facts, all find homes in footnotes, in digressions and disquisitions which themselves are welcome, since they are the materia prima of the book, the flow of the mind, the inside story, as it were.
Real life in fiction is dead. It's inert, because life is chaos. It has none of the symmetries and patterning of a novel. And also that you can't write about your own sex life without being disgusting, or at least embarrassing. There isn't a voice that can do it.
Mentorship, friendship, sexual partnerships. These perennial themes are the sources of fuel for Amos's writing life, his life, in other words. Inside Story depicts the persistence of Amos's sexual persona across decades, patted down and never reappraised, but serving as a continuous wellspring of imaginative interpolation, a fount in which Amos has dipped his cup time and again, even though the thrust of life eventually settles, and in his case, the core marriage to Elena emerges in a rather triumphalist mode. What is Amos able to achieve with the decidedly new genre rendered by Inside Story? He maps time as abstracted from distance, its perennial twin, in the sublime nonlinear fashion of a lucid daydream. With this novel, Amos has produced a form of fiction better suited to handle a deeper and perhaps more scientifically mature understanding of consciousness, with a dimensionality befitting deep readers in our age. It is a form suited to the uncanny resonance of meaning across time and across the lines and paragraphs which are, like many of his other novels, compulsively readable, as they were, no doubt, compulsively written and rewritten. The trend is for literary novels to go unnoticed, underappreciated, or alternately scorned by an increasingly jealous readership composed increasingly of fellow practitioners, fellow authors. Nevertheless, Inside Story distinguishes itself as one of the most important creative literary works of the present century, in part by speaking directly to and about those fellow practitioners. And Amos's writing has the uncanny power to commit true lies to paper with rigorous ambiguity. Wisdom and style dovetail into a cogent and satisfying whole, and yet, in part because of the timing of the book's release during the pandemic, it went almost entirely unnoticed by the literati, let alone that more mythic creature, the common reader. Amos is a master of incremental suspense, a flag planter, a mile marker, as when he pummels the readers with a rich set of questions, then writes, "I'll give you a few minutes to think," before supplying us with his cheat sheet. The interspersed sections, How to Write, ever charming, astute, incisive, and kindly, suggest rather baldly toward the end of the book, as Amos switches momentarily to second person, that Amos's implied readership are in fact writers. For writers are the best and worst of readers, and ultimately, it might be argued, the most dogged. Quote, "Your path as a writer will be largely determined by temperament. Are you cautious, buoyant, transgressive, methodical? It is temperament that decides the most fundamental distinctions of all. Are you a writer of prose or a writer of verse?" End quote. So what of this new, cogent, far-reaching dimensionality? The mechanism for it needs to be reinvented each generation, and in ours, Amos is the man for the job. Proust did it once. Norwegian writer Karl Ove Knausgård is another more recent practitioner. Incidentally, Knausgård's second volume of autofiction was reviewed in the New York Times with the review title, Inside Story. That is an inevitable cutesyism perhaps, but not to be dismissed from the evidentiary record. Amos writes, "One of the several hindrances in life writing is that it gives the subconscious so little to do. With fiction, you often have to sleep on it, to rejoin the world of dreams and death from which many believe all human energy comes. Life writing, the facts, the linear reality of things that went ahead and happened, doesn't leave much room for the subliminal, and this cannot be anything but a loss." End quote. Elena is the true moral force of the novel, hiding in plain sight. She is the culmination of his wish for a good life and a turning away from suicidal ideation, even if those were, at their most intent, merely philosophical rootings out. She, Elena, is direct, correct, a thinker, a writer, a doer, a mother, and a salve, a source of light and heat, a Uruguayan, a Jew, an American. One of the great pleasures of Inside Story is to sit with Christopher Hitchens a little while longer. As the hitch appears more frequently, the book gets more frequently delicious. Part of the price we pay is having vicariously to watch him die. Hitchens, a force majeure as friend, writer, raconteur, and polemicist, is also the funniest character in the novel by far, and among the wittiest public figures of our own era. He died as he lived, fighting it out in the public square. Hitchens is the key friendship in the book, and friendship is but little without a shared sense of humor. What is literature good for, anyway, if not for cultivating one's good humor? Why would it matter to have a relationship with irony, after all, or an accommodation of otherness, an appreciation or indeed a passion for nuance, or the capacity for deep abstraction, and the habitual practice, literature as a way of life, of thinking our way back to earth in order to parse reality and improve our relationships, not least of which with ourselves? Reading goes a long way towards thinking, and to think clearly is to parse, in other words, to delineate, to discriminate, to judge for oneself, to stand in this increasingly crowded and frequently boorish world for something. Our latter-day maestro, Martin Amis, stands for the golden realm of literary life, ever fleeting and duked out in all its glory, mania, anxiety, work, and wisdom, plunged to the hilt, bespattered and resounding in the public square along with Hitch, Rushdie, Bellow, McEwen, and all his great good pals, where he has regaled us so scintillatingly for half a century now. The book's a must-read. Thank you. Thank you for joining us today. If you enjoyed this review, make sure to check out our video on Christopher Hitchens. And for more in-depth reviews and other literary content, consider becoming a subscriber.